Hey guys, welcome to another special issue of, I guess, R-rated Christianity. Kind of special. Yesterday was Thanksgiving. We hope you had a very blessed Thanksgiving. We're going to talk about Thanksgiving today. Hope you enjoyed it with your family. It's important to be grateful. We talked about that, but it's also important who you're grateful to. I think that's the second. I don't think you can be grateful unless you have an object of your gratitude. I mean, who are you grateful to? What are you grateful for? Who are you grateful to? We're going to talk about some of these things because Thanksgiving is one of our foundational traditions in this country. You know, screw apple pie in baseball. I mean, Thanksgiving is truly an American tradition. Canada, I got friends in Canada. I've been on a Zoom call. They don't know. They don't give a shit about Thanksgiving, so to speak. Mexico doesn't celebrate it. This is an American thing, and we want to talk about that and dissect it because there's an attack on Thanksgiving. I think there's a reason for that. We believe there's a reason for that. Thanksgiving is a foundational aspect. It's a core aspect of this country. It helps define. Sorry, I had a little bit of leftover. Kind of our mindset, our principles, our ideas. Ideas have consequences. We always say, and there's some ideas that are set forth in the first Thanksgiving. We'll talk about that. There was actually expressions of Thanksgiving before 1621, but we're going to focus on the Pilgrims. And their journey is fascinating. This is stuff that's not taught in schools. Matter of fact, this lies are taught, unfortunately, to our young people. I think it's important to bring light to this situation. We're called to be salt and light, so we should just follow the truth wherever it leads us. We're not here to make it and twist it to our Christian likings. We're just going to follow the truth, period. If the truth sucks, then so be it. If it's harsh, so be it. If it's something that we can say, you know what, that sucked about America, about this, about the Pilgrims, about early Christians, about whatever it is, but there's a repentive spirit. Let's not do that again because that doesn't follow what God expects of us. Then that's what you learn, and that's called maturation, maturity, and that's what God is focused on, our maturity, not our happiness. And He doesn't hang out on our feelings. He wants us to mature like any parent wants their children to mature. And so truth is part of that maturation process, and we have to know the truth so we can defend it. Jesus said in John 8:31-33, that if you're truly my disciples, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. From what? From lies, from your own thoughts, your processes, any type of bondage you're being held into. And so our young people, and there's a push in this country, not just our young people, are being taught a bunch of bullshit. And we should talk about why it's bullshit. What is the truth? You got to replace something. If you're going to call out something to be bullshit, then you got to replace it with the truth. But here's the key, but back it up. It's not just our opinion. We're not going to talk to you about George Araujo's opinion, although it's important, or my opinion. I'm just a schmuck with a big mouth and an opinion about things. But I like to base my opinions on fact. And we just need to bring truth to the situation because it's really, it's alarming. It should be alarming because there's some things that have been taken out of context. There's some things that are true, but a lot of things out of context. And then there's a lot of stuff that is just outright lies, not even close to the truth, not even a distortion of the truth, just lies. And when you intentionally leave something out, to me, that's a lie because you know you're doing that to mislead somebody. So we're going to talk about all these things. It's a fascinating study. Over the years, I studied Thanksgiving a little bit more every year, and then I forget things, and then I remind myself of things as I look into stuff. And I can't get enough of this stuff, of just history in general. But I think our American history is important. Thanksgiving's a fascinating story because arguably this is kind of this is the undergirdings of our country. When you think about that, from the Mayflower Compact in 1621 to
the earliest seeds of our constitutional republic.
It's the earliest. I mean,
Yeah.
and before
Seeds were planted that
1621, you have the 1619 project. Where did that come from? The first slaves here, and then you have the Jamestown, debacle. I'll call it that, from 1607. And there's the difference between Jamestown, what happened there, and the people there, and the mindset there, and the ideology there, and their experiment there, which was more socialistic in nature, and it absolutely was a debacle. And then to Plymouth and the Pilgrims and what they thought and why they left England to Holland, from Holland to the States. Where were they going? Were there two ships versus one? Was it the Speedwell and the Mayflower? And then ended up only being 101 people, 53 survived. A lot of shit happened to them. It's a fascinating journey, a journey of hardship. And when you think about what did they really have to be thankful for, when you listen and study their journey and what they went through, you would think, you have nothing to be thankful for. But there was a lot to be thankful for. From Squanto, the Indian, to the Indian before him, what's his name? Something South.
Samoset.
What is it?
Samoset.
Samoset?
Samoset.
Somerset?
Yes.
Like Somerset?
Samoset.
Yeah, I thought it was Somerset. Somerset. And then he brought Squanto into the group. And what happened to Squanto? And Squanto's journey, I mean, that guy's truly an American hero. I mean, he really, right? I mean, Squanto, you think about it. We should be honoring, not worshiping, honoring Squanto. He's an American hero. Stuff that you just learn, it ignites me because it invigorates me to know the truth of this country and where our faith played a role in it and when it didn't. And people that screwed it up, from Thomas Hunt to other people, to people that got it right. And then the result is this great country. Well, this once great country. Hopefully we'll make it that way again. But the experiment was a wonderful set of ideas in that Constitution. And all of this led up to the 1776 and 78 and then how we've lost and gotten away from it. There's a fascinating study and journey that we thought people would benefit from by just talking through it, talking through the process. And so the push is, I don't know if you guys, we can't play it, but there's actually things being taught to our young people and just pushed in media today that even my wife asked me about Thanksgiving and why are people saying that we should be mourning? I mean, truly, there's a push out there that is advocating that this should not be a day of Thanksgiving. This should be a day of mourning.
Oh my goodness!
Because it's deceptive, which is despicable, disingenuous, and there needs to be pushback. I mean, I was listening I was watching this conservative show or this that they were commenting on this narrative out there, and they didn't even respond with facts. It was kind of just like, well, nobody's perfect, and yeah, there's bad aspects, but do you focus on the bad or the good? They were making comments about the miserable Joy Reid and how her ideology and her mindset is just so, I mean, demented is the word. I don't know what it is. She's just a miserable chick, man.
She's lost her mind and she's miserable.
She's a miserable person.
But I think
she's a liar too.
But I think she's an accurate depiction, Nico, of the average teacher in the American high school, the average professor in the American college. These are anti-American, rabidly hating individuals. I mean, they hate the history of the country because they hate it. They revise it. It's like they don't like what they think happened. So then they remake history in their own image, and it's pretty despicable and filled with lots of hatred, lots of deception. Here's Fox News. Here's a piece from Fox News on November 21st, just a couple days ago. They wrote, "This week, millions of Americans will be celebrating Thanksgiving with family and friends, eating a good meal and watching football. But a creeping vilification of the popular holiday has spread across media outlets and schools, claiming that Thanksgiving is about genocide and stolen land or imperialism." And they go on and they quote a Native American activist who said on MSNBC last year, quote, "Instead of bringing suffering or stuffing and biscuits, those settlers brought genocide and violence." Now that, of course, we argue is a pile of bullshit. And the problem is that what's happening here, I mean, if this was harmless, it's one thing, but it's not harmless. This is doing violence to our boys and girls. It really is. They're growing up with a completely deceptive and erroneous view of American history, and they're hating themselves. That's what's happening. They hate their country. They hate themselves, really. And if they're born and raised in a Christian family, Nico, they hate their faith, because what's happening is that they're blaming the Christian faith for bringing genocide and bringing violence and bringing discrimination and bringing theft and what they call imperialism to North American shores. That is nothing but the lie. In fact, the opposite is actually true.
We look, and this is not going to be the scholarly dive that George is more than capable, and I can discuss with you as well, but not like George can, of the history. We just don't have the time. We just merely don't have the time unless we made this a several-part series.
We can focus on those two claims.
Yeah.
Genocide and imperialism.
But we got to do some foundational. So they left for religious freedom, they say. So in England, there was an Anglican king. He believed that he was the leader of the church. You had the separatists or the Puritans, right? That's what the Pilgrims were.
Well, that's right. The Pilgrims were made up of Puritans and separatists,
right,
and strangers. We'll get to that in a second.
Right, yes, exactly.
But Puritans, purity. They believed that the Church of England had brought over some artifacts of the previous Catholic faith. because the Anglican Church is a break-off in the 1530s. King Henry VIII is a break-off. He basically abolished the Catholic Church in England, and he set himself as the new head of the Christian Church or the Anglican.
And
Church.
how dare these people say that Jesus Christ is the head of the church?
Yeah.
And that was outlawed. So they were literally outlawed, and then they couldn't read, they couldn't study what you taught, what you printed. What was his name? William. Starts with a B. William something. He had a printing press. He was a Puritan. I had the name just before we started the show. It just lost me.
Wilberforce?
Well,
No.
there's William Tyndall.
No.
There's
It's with a B. It'll
okay,
come
go
in
ahead.
a second. But he had a printing press, and he was told, don't print. And they moved to Holland thinking that they were going to get away because Holland was more tolerant. But you still...
William Bradford.
That was it. Maybe that was...
He's also the second governor of Plymouth Colony. You're not talking about him.
No.
But go ahead, please continue your thought, because I want to jump on it.
Well, they moved to Holland, so they move away from this, thinking that they're going to have religious freedom in Holland. But Holland was Holland, right? Amsterdam.
Well, but there's a reason for that, because Holland welcomed Protestant dissenters.
Right.
Right. It was kind of a haven for that.
But it wasn't a Protestant culture. I mean, they were exposed to a secular, very secular, prostitution,
It was
drinking.
far from perfect.
To say the least.
There were for those of you who are, because I mean, we're not going to read line by line on a history book here, but if you look this up and you look at the years prior to 1620, you're going to see that while Holland actually provided a haven for Protestant dissenters, like the Pilgrims, it wasn't perfect.
No.
I mean, we're talking about a very violent time, Nico, in Europe. I look up the 30 Years' War. There's a lot of conflict between Catholic European states and Protestant European states. The Pilgrims are caught in the middle. This is not ideal. And then they can't be in England because they can't meet in homes for Bible studies.
They were close enough to the king that he actually sent soldiers over there to tell them, hey, don't be sending your shit back over here, because they made a Bible with actual commentary to teach them, because they weren't trained to study the Bible. So they had it was a commentary that was sent back to them, and how dare you question?
They had their own publications.
Right.
They would want to meet in private houses for worship and Bible study, and they couldn't. So that's not going to fly. They want to be able to get back to the teachings of the apostles. So they don't want the church to govern that. And so there's a lot of dissent. Holland is not ideal. So, and these aren't rich people. And there's a lot of economic reasons too. We don't want to leave that out too. It's just that we don't have time. Like Nico said, we don't have 3 hours here. But there's a lot of reasons why Holland was not going to work for them. And so they brought some funds together. They obtained some financing from the London Company. There were early factions before corporations. And they were able to get some funds to finally find their way onto a cargo ship. The Mayflower was a cargo ship.
But there was 2 ships initially, right?
Yes.
Then there was leakage in that first ship. So that's why they all packed into the Mayflower with some strangers and pilgrims. They brought that damn printing press that ended up being...
In order for the London Company to finance it, it couldn't just be them on the ship.
Right.
They needed to have other people. By the way, they were not all believers. You had these strangers. Guys who would later, by the way, end up being really good friends with the Pilgrims. Yeah. Survival tends to do that to you, by the way. So they overcame their differences later. But you're right, it was kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah.
And boy, what a cluster on that ship. 102 of them.
With a printing press. No, but that's important. That ended up being important, So the king... what are you doing, guy?
That was an accident. I'm so
okay?
sorry.
Yes, there he is.
There's
king
the king,
first.
King Jeff.
Right here, he's got the beard. He doesn't have the feathered cap.
So
I must hit a button.
so they come and they steal a lot of the lettering, so they can't actually print. But they take this damn printing press on an overly packed Mayflower, because remember that wasn't the Swalwell that was out there. There was leakage, so they brought it back, and they ended up going with the Mayflower by itself. 66 days at the sea. On sea, and one of the main beams actually broke. There was a lot of storms they dealt with. There was a lot of sickness, and then they actually used some type of pump mechanism in the printing press to hoist it up or to fix it. They get back on track. They were aiming for Virginia. I'm just giving you Cliff Note guides. I mean, this is just, we're really trying to get down to when they get on land and the first Thanksgiving.
It's really a miracle that only 2 people. I mean, a lot of suffering, but only 2 people. They lost 2 people before they came into shore.
But then once they get there, it's a different story.
Yeah. And they thought the tough part was over.
Yeah. So they get there. They're heading for Virginia. Then the
Back up a quick second.
Okay.
They had a charter from the king
to get to Virginia.
go to the Virginia colony. They missed it by 200 miles.
Yep.
They end up
Because of
north
a
200
storm.
miles.
Because of a storm threw them off track.
Indeed.
Right.
So they miss it by 200 miles. They're in Massachusetts, okay? They are very far from Virginia. Their charter is really immaterial. It pertains to Virginia. It doesn't pertain to where they are. So they needed a new charter. Go.
Okay. So they make it to they make it to Plymouth. 101, 102 people in their ship.
Just so you know, September 6th they leave. They come into harbor November 9th.
16, 20.
Yes. They come into harbor, Plymouth Harbor, on November 9th, and they fall ashore November 11th. Go
Yes.
ahead.
So, but before they do that, so it's during winter. Remember that because of the delays, they were trying to leave a lot sooner. They didn't. So they end up getting here, and up north, here in Texas, winters are different than up north. I mean, your parents, you lived up there up north,
Oh,
Pennsylvania.
yeah. No, I lived in Massachusetts.
I lived in Massachusetts too.
Yeah, both of you guys.
And yeah, it'll rip you apart.
Yeah.
There's snow 4 months a year.
And I'm going to retract and rephrase.
Okay.
The Mayflower Compact, November 11th. They fall ashore December 6th. Okay, go ahead, please continue.
thank you.
Just trying to give you a sense of timeline.
So they don't have a charter. So they actually
They need one.
need one. So they write it. I'll
Got
read
it? You got it there?
I have it here.
It's a paragraph.
It's just, but it's
all it is.
interesting, and I'll
Yes,
read
yes.
a good portion of it, not all of it. Here's their rights. They have to have this covenant, this new agreement. In the name of God, amen. We, whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God, of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King, defender of the faith, having undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith and honor of our king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presents solemnly and mutually in the presence of God and one another covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body, because they had no civil governance, because they didn't land where they were supposed to land. So there's nothing here. And there's something interesting about Plymouth that we'll talk about with Squanto and the Native Americans that lived there at the time, or used to live there. In a civil body, a politic, for our better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends foresaid, and by virtue hereof and enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices from time to time as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise ourselves submission and obedience and blah, and then they finish it off. So they're making this new pact because there's no governance there. So they go, shit. I mean, and let me tell you, so they get there, the winter is brutal. They lose almost half of the 101, 102. There's 53 of them left, right? 53 of them left. 22 men. That's a big point when you talk about genocide and the first Thanksgiving and who's stealing land and all this other shit. There's 22 men out of that. And I think only 4 women, something like that. A lot of children. I don't know exactly for different accounts on that, but just a lot of people passed away. So they end up there. And they run into that first Native American, that first Indian. What's the name? You said the name earlier.
Yeah, Samoset. You're
Samoset.
fast forwarding here. I think.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Okay,
Yes,
okay.
I'm trying to save some time. I want to get to Thanksgiving. Am I missing something?
Please proceed.
Okay, so they get to this guy. He speaks English because he learned English.
I want people to understand that where they land, it's completely destitute.
Well, no, but
There's
why?
nothing there.
But why? Hold on.
Okay, go ahead.
But Squanto, is it Squanto? Squanto's tribe used to live there. Remember? So Squanto. I mean, we're gonna get all over the place, but we're just trying to save some time. So Squanto's tribe lived there. He was actually taken into slavery twice. Was taken to Spain the last time. Was bought by some monks.
In 1605 and 1614.
And he buys some, but he lives with monks for like 7, 8, 9 years, learns English, learns the English way, and then makes his way back to Plymouth, where his tribe and wife and cousins and aunts and brothers and all these people were there, but they were all decimated. All of them died from a plague or some type of illness.
Correct.
All of them. Ironically, if Squanto's there and doesn't get taken in, talk about Romans 8:28, right? God works all things out for the good of those who love him and called by his purpose. If he's not taken into slavery, he doesn't learn English. He dies with everybody else. He's not there to be there when the pilgrims show up, because Samoset, whatever his name, sorry, excuse me, whatever his name is, he brings in Squanto. I'm trying to get to the point. He brings in Squanto. Squanto speaks English better than him. ends up staying with the Pilgrims, teaching them how to fish, teaching them how to grow crops, teaching them how to live on the land, because that was his land. Now,
And to establish trade with other Indian tribes.
yes. Now, here's the Pilgrims. Even though the king had given them permission, they purchased the land from one of the tribes around there because they believed that land was cursed. They didn't understand about illnesses. They said, "We don't want to live there. You want to buy it? Sure." They paid a fair price for it, for that land. They didn't steal crap.
That purchase came later.
I got it, but what I'm saying is they didn't take shit.
Well, no, they didn't, and that's an important point.
Nor could they. There were only 22 guys.
Yeah, that's true. We should park ourselves there.
What are we
going
gonna
to do? We should park ourselves there for a little bit because that land was devastated. Of people. I mean, absolutely decimated. It's assumed by scholarship that there were as many as 2,000 Indians, as many as 2,000 Indians living in that area, and there's a lot of research done on what exactly was the nature of the plague. Now, this is important because what we hear is that you have genocide. Genocide is deliberate extermination. It's the governmental, like the official government sourced or government induced or government financed or advanced extermination of an entire people. That's what
Nazis,
that is.
the example.
That's exactly right.
Nazis
There's
and
no
Jews.
question. The final solution to the Jewish question by the Nazis. Yeah, it's a great example.
Right.
So, I mean, this is just it's just absurd to suggest that was the case here. I mean, it just couldn't be farther from the truth. And we have lots and lots of sources on this, and not just Christian sources. There's lots of historical sources on this. The CDC, for instance, I think, when they were actually doing real science, not in the age of Fauci, Mr. Science. The CDC has actually written an excellent paper. Go to the Journal of the Emerging Infectious Diseases, Emerging Infectious Diseases by the CDC, February of 2010, I think volume 16, number 2. Read it. It actually states straight up front, by the time, between 1616, Nico, and 1619 in New England, there was a virtual extermination of Indian tribes by the plague. Now, it's true that it's conceivable that European ships would have brought them. They don't know.
But that wasn't
was it yellow
authorized.
fever? Was
Yeah.
it chicken pox? They don't know. I think the leading theory is that was something called leptospirosis. And what that is, it's really nasty. This is when, I was telling Jaden on the way over here, when rodent urine on European ships finds its way into a water source, Nico. And then what happened is that ultimately sort of found its way to indigenous land and water. And they had no pre-existing protection for that. And this was just spread like wildfire. And it was horrible and horrific. And the idea that genocide had anything to do with this is nonsense. Now, were there atrocities? Yes, but that's not genocide.
But that's focused on Jamestown.
And that's the story of
John,
Squanto.
and John
Yes,
Smith.
That's the story of Squanto.
And Pocahontas. That's a whole
Yeah,
separate
I don't want to
story.
throw John Smith into that because we don't know that John Smith
No, I'm not saying that he did
One of
it.
his commanders,
Thomas
Thomas Hunt. Is that what you're
after
talking about?
John Smith goes back to England because they tried to kill him, other people took over, and then that's a whole separate story is what I'm saying. I'm not throwing John Smith under the bus. I'm just saying that's a whole separate Jamestown story.
But it's important to address this genocide nonsense. That even though there were tensions, we know there were tensions,
Well,
but it didn't happen.
But not initially. I mean,
not initially. After at least 30 to 40 years.
50 years, they say that was the longest standing treaty between English settlers and Native Americans was the Pilgrims Treaty. Because they purchased, they lived in harmony. Squanto was there. He was a conduit, and which leads us.
I don't think it was 50 years. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because
Some say 50 years.
And you actually reminded me this a few days ago, which is important. This is a very long-lasting peace treaty.
The
It really
longest,
is.
right?
Yeah, indeed.
Arguably.
And so signed in, a lot of noise over there, signed in 1621. John Carver was actually the first governor of the Plymouth colony. He died in 1621. I mean, literally months after he signed it.
It's open. It's open. It's open.
We're actually talking to a person
Sorry.
here. It's not
Yeah.
Jesus. It's always, door's always open. to
Usually
Jesus.
he
I don't
walks
know
through
this.
the walls.
Yeah, that's right. He's not bound by garage doors. So John Carver signs it. He ends up expiring later in 1621. Then William Bradford becomes the second governor.
Yes.
He's a signatory. So, but he doesn't die until 1657. And it's really when things start going south in King Philip's War. So a good solid 30 to 40 years of peace, true peace. And and it really is quite, I mean, if you look, and we have primary resources on this. William Bradford had a manuscript that we now have in the possession of the United States National Archives. It's wonderful, Nico. We can actually go back and see what the man wrote about the interactions. It's called On Plymouth Plantation. It's unbelievably detailed. And the relationship between the Wampanoag Indians.
That's them.
Okay, where Samoset was from. And the Indian chiefs, Massasoit. And then they sort of adopted Squanto because he wasn't originally from them, as you just said. He was a Penobscot Indian. I mean, it was congenial. It was mutually beneficial. It was friendly.
Jaden,
I mean, it really is pretty impressive. And the Pilgrims, when they heard of the atrocities that had been done
Sorry, we're good.
by Virginian settlers, I mean, Bradford's journal actually points out the shame that they felt, that the Pilgrims felt, because they knew that other English settlers had treated the Indians that way. And because
Gosh,
their
there's so much.
relationship with the Indians was nothing like that. The reason we're bringing this up is because a lot of unfair blame is placed on the shoulders of the Pilgrims.
Yes.
And it's unjust. And I can't stand injustice. This is disgusting to advance a political agenda. This bullshit has to stop.
Okay, well,
Go ahead.
two things. You said so much good stuff too. So before we get to 1621, the first Thanksgiving, and the dynamics of it, there's this 1619 issue, right? So you have slaves. Remember the whole 1619 project? Where that's the beginning of our country.
Nicole Hannah-Jones, New York Times. It's a historical revisionism.
That our foundation is rotten. So remember, Jamestown has been there since 1607.
And racist.
There's a lot of crap going on in Jamestown, which was really a socialistic experiment, and it went apeshit really down quickly, which we can talk about at another time. But in 1619, there were slaves brought to Jamestown, but let's talk about briefly how and why. There's a Portuguese ship. Sorry, George. There's a Portuguese ship traveling with slaves during the slave trade. They get intercepted by two British ships, right? So they're taken over. These slaves are taken on board. And they said, we got to take them somewhere. So they take them to Jamestown. They're dropped off in Jamestown. Slavery was outlawed at Jamestown at that time. They become indentured servants for 7 years, roughly. George, correct me if I'm wrong. 7 years. And at the end of the 7 years, whether they were treated badly or not, that's okay. We can debate that, or whether they were supposed to, they weren't supposed to, because slavery was outlawed in 1619 in Jamestown. Even though Jamestown had a lot of other issues, you don't have to try to make shit up. They were jacked up as it was, and we'll talk about that some other time. But at the end of the 7 years, they were actually given property to start, because their indentured servitude was done. They had served their time. They were actually saved from Portuguese slave traders, brought to where they would have died for sure over there. There was an average of 3 to 5 years of living in that environment. And then they were given land. So that in itself is a deceptive. So yes, were there slaves brought in 1619 to Jamestown, which is not Plymouth?
This is really.
Am I okay?
I
on
just
this?
want people to understand.
But am I right on the facts?
You, for the most part.
Okay, well.
You might find a rendition that uses a Dutch slave ship.
He's Portuguese, by the way. She's the
No. I'm
joking.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for telling people I'm Portuguese. That's actually true. And the Portuguese were major players in the transatlantic slave trade. There's no question about it. There's no excusing that nonsense too.
So, but it was either Dutch or Portuguese.
That's right. And we're talking about 20. I just want people
thought
to
it was
understand
20.
it's not thousands and thousands.
Yeah, 20
I
or
just want
20.
you to understand, have a sense of the scope here.
That's a good word.
I mean, one kidnapped life is evil and
many.
atrocious and disgusting. I just want you to understand it's not thousands
right.
of bodies, okay?
It wasn't a series of them coming
Right.
in. It
It's
was
important people understand
It was one
it's
load.
20.
It was a load, right?
Yeah, and indentured servitude was meant to be a constructive arrangement, and it wasn't just black persons; it was also white persons from Europe. You could be an indentured servant.
Could be Irish.
And by the way, there's some amazing stories. If you actually read your history, there's some amazing stories of indentured servants that worked through their period.
Yep.
They became colonists. They started businesses and became unbelievably prosperous. So, I mean, it really is quite fascinating. And I don't want to sugarcoat it in any way, and we're not trying to do that.
No, we're just
some of that indentured servitude turned nasty.
Yep.
I mean, there were atrocities. We mentioned about.
But those are individuals making those shitty decisions.
They are.
And evil decisions.
This wasn't
You don't
systemic.
impugn, exactly. It wasn't systemic, and you don't impugn a whole population for the bullshit of one and the evil of one. I just couldn't help but mention that because 1619 comes up a lot, and it's right close by, because at 1621, the first Thanksgiving, arguably, what the hell were they thankful for? They lose half of their people.
Good question. What were they? So this is in the fall of 1621. We've not gone
October,
a year.
they believe, right? They believe it's somewhere in
It's in
October.
the fall of 1621, and you've got, thank God, by the help of Squanto, they've actually been able to collect
American
a very substantial harvest, right? 60% of them are wiped out,
And they
so
were
Why would they be
encouraged-
thankful?
They were encouraged because they were hopeful that they were going to make it through this winter.
It's not hard because it's not 100%. That's why they're grateful. because
careful with
40%.
that.
I'm saying, why are they thankful?
Oh yeah,
Because
well they were grateful
40%
for
are still
Squanto.
alive.
For
That's why.
Squanto, when you listen to Squanto's story about how that's not providential, how that's not divine intervention, how that's not a Romans 8:28 circumstance. And so here's what happens. So they invite
Yes.
the tribe, right? So they bring 90 braves, 90 strapping braves with these 22 dudes and 30 whatever women and children, and they have a 3-day festival. And yes, there was some fowl and some turkey and deer, and they had eel and they had sea bass and cod. I mean, which to your mama's wonderful meals.
Yeah.
Cod, she makes a great cod dish. I mean, cod, and they had this 3-day festival where there was shooting events and there was wrestling and there was sporting events. So when you're eating your ass off
wasn't
watching
football.
football,
It wasn't football.
I know, but
it was sport.
But it was
Yep.
It was
sports.
sport.
They
That's
were
in the journal.
competing. They were
The
enjoying.
Indians brought venison.
Yep.
I'll take some venison, right? No question. I pulled up Reverend Billy Falling, who's a Native American minister and author. You guys can look him up. This guy's pretty interesting.
Spell falling for everybody.
Falling, like falling, as in victim of gravity. Okay, a Native American minister and author. He was I think the guy's pretty impressive. So here's what he wrote: "Quote: As a Native American, I thank God for the Europeans that brought us the gospel and brought us Western civilization. Why? Well, Native Americans were just as pagan as the rest of the world.
Oh God, yes.
Yep.
Okay,
More so.
they practice cannibalism. That is true. They
Slavery.
practice
Child sacrifice.
devil worship, spiritualism. That's true. They practice slavery. Yeah, that's true. I just want you guys to know that by the time, and Nico and I were texting back and forth, and I said it deliberately this way. By the time the Pilgrims landed on North American shores, okay, they landed on blood-soaked land.
Yes.
I want you guys to understand it. It didn't become blood-soaked because of them. It was already that way. Tribal civil war was rampant, Nico.
Rampant.
Centuries.
I like your
Okay?
example.
This is a well-documented.
In Joshua, you say that they weren't just sitting there knitting and hanging out.
Right.
They were, yeah.
Exactly. But I want to finish this guy's quote because I think his perspective is amazing. They practice cannibalism, they practice devil worship, they practice slavery, they practice polygamy. They practiced all the sins of the flesh that the rest of the world practiced. It's hard today to find a sweat. We'll explain what that is. Where, as a Native American, you can go inside and smoke out your sins. But it's easy to find Native Americans in any congregation in the United States worshiping the Lord Jesus Christ because of the Europeans, and I thank God for that.
Wow.
That's Native American minister,
Wow,
Reverend.
that's crazy.
So that's perspective. He would acknowledge. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
you,
no,
brother.
go, Daddy,
He would
please.
acknowledge history. History is what it is. There's the good, there's the bad, there's the ugly. Right? There are a lot.
but
There's a
what-
lot of atrocities that were committed, but later mostly. Certainly
And not by,
during
but
the
not,
Pilgrim era.
but not institutionally.
No.
I mean, it wasn't their mission. This is my point. That's why the Mayflower Compact is so important. Arguably, the first purely American document. Because remember, there was instruction, decrees from England in Virginia and other colonies.
Charter?
Charters. Thank you. I
okay.
couldn't think of the word.
It's all right.
Charter. But this was because there was no charter in this area and it was uncharted territory, no pun intended. They create this Mayflower Compact, and that was the first purely American compact. And you see the ideas ingrained in
but
it.
just park there for a moment. This matters. This is the earliest signs of social compact theory. This is consent of the governed. What is
Yes.
that? Think about that.
Lincoln
the only
mentioned
thing,
this.
What was the only thing binding them to the Mayflower Compact is their willingness to be governed by it.
Yes.
That's the point. This is where we get the earliest vestiges of self-government, Nico. This is a big deal. This is why it's appropriate to look at the Pilgrims as truly our American founders.
Yep.
And this is why Lincoln in 1863 recognized it as much. By the way, he knew
He
all
didn't
about
recognize Jamestown.
No, he didn't. Because he saw them as a bunch of,
Rogue idiots.
really rebellious pricks.
Yep,
They were.
100%.
And so Squanto's negative experiences really with the English settlers really came from the Virginia experiment.
Yes.
In Jamestown.
Yep.
It really did.
Well,
Now, I'm not
look
saying
how God
everybody,
used
and I'm
it.
not saying everybody in Jamestown
Right.
was a prick. I'm just saying
lot of them.
that the experiences that we
It was
have
more often that you would have a bad experience.
No,
there.
it was,
Yes, right.
let me tell you.
The experiences that we have, the negative experiences that we have between English settlers and Native Americans
right.
would not have come from the Plymouth colony. I just want to be very, very clear about that. And we're
That's
talking
right.
really about the first 3 to 4 decades because there are issues later on, because it's now a new generation. And
But there's issues with the Native Americans with them as well. Of
course there were.
I mean, it's not a one size issue deal, but that's a separate issue. I'm going back to that first indictment that this should be a day of mourning. My question would be, what are we mourning? Are we mourning half of the settlers that were lost on their? Are we mourning the loss of children and spouses? What are we mourning? I want to know what we're mourning about the first Thanksgiving, the first recognized Thanksgiving. What are we mourning?
Because we've blown apart the genocide bullshit. Okay, we're not mourning genocide because there was nothing.
There was no genocide.
To mourn.
There was zero genocide. I mean, there was
go ahead,
3
please,
days.
finish your thought.
There's 3 days of a festival. There's 3 days where 90 strapping braves, badass, muscular, scout killing some bitches, could have taken out those 22 dudes without a problem. I don't care what weapons they had. There's just no, and they could have taken their women and children as slaves and raped all that. So there's credit to them as well. And Squanto's a huge part of that.
Yeah,
Squanto's an American hero.
Absolutely, I think so.
I mean,
let me tell you what I mourn. Okay, I mourn that it started out as a 3-day celebration and we're down to 1. That irritates me a little bit. I'd like to have a 3-day Thanksgiving, right? I mean, I'm mourning that
with,
right now.
yeah.
Activities,
but I want to talk about this mutual
praising God.
Yeah, this mutual beneficial arrangement. I want you guys to understand that Massasoit, the chief of the Wampanoag, welcomed the Pilgrims once he realized that they weren't hostile. I mean, they're just freaking trying to survive, by the way. And they were scared as the
when
Indians.
They saw him. Some scholars say he said, "Welcome. Do you have any beer?" Right? I mean, that's a famous quote. They say they attribute to him.
And so I
he knows about beer because of the traders.
But it didn't start out that way. See, the Pilgrims
had brandy,
they
not
didn't
beer.
meet these guys. I want you to understand they didn't. By the time they landed, came ashore in early December of 1620, they hadn't yet met any Indians. It wasn't until the spring, like March of 1621. They were absolutely decimated, as we said. Their populations went way down because they simply could not survive that winter. But I want to point out something that for the first few months, they were the Mayflower, first of all, was used as a hospital ship.
Yes.
I want you to understand that. The guys that came ashore struggled immensely, and many of them died. But this is an interesting piece of history I want you guys to understand. I think it's fascinating. They were just as scared about what they might find inland with Native Americans as the Native Americans might have been of them. They were scared. I was telling Jaden on the way over here, the Pilgrims were deathly scared to bury their dead. Recognize that. And the reason for that is because they didn't want any onlookers from the inland woods to see their numbers diminishing. So what they did is they propped up these bodies around the perimeter of the settlement against trees.
Wow.
And they put muskets in their hands.
Wow.
Okay? To give the appearance that they weren't as isolated as they
That
were.
is
Weekend at Bernie's. This is Weekend at the Mayflower.
That is
crazy. Right? I mean, this is reality.
I mean, this idea
That is
of English soldiers landing with cannons behind them and unloading on these innocent, precious tribes. This is bullshit. I want you to understand that these are peoples that came together. And they actually really worked together.
Yeah.
When they came together in the spring of 1621, Samoset first, then Massasoit. Massasoit, by the way, loved the idea of a treaty when he realized these people weren't hostile.
Yes.
He loved the idea of a treaty because remember, the plague had wiped out not just the Penobscot, but it had wiped out plenty of Wampanoans. And so here's the other issue. His numbers have gone down, Nico.
Whose?
Massasoit's. And so if
he was the chief.
Yes, and so if he can have a partnership with the Pilgrims, it'll give him significant leverage against
other tribes,
hostile
yes.
tribes.
I mean, because remember, they're going at each other. You talk about genocide; it's these tribes on tribes, and he wanted some cover too. It's like, hey, look at all the people.
Without question.
Now, granted, the Pilgrims had their own armed forces. It was 16 men out of the 22.
Run by one of the strangers,
Yep.
Miles Standish,
Yep.
actually, and I think John Alton. So these guys
16 versus
these
90.
weren't pious men, at least not originally.
They loved their guns. They believed in them. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But all I'm saying is we've got to be able to respond back. That's not even look, the 1619 stuff in Jamestown, that's taken a little bit of truth out of context, makes a great lie. This is just complete bullshit. It's an outright deceptive lie. There's nothing about the Mayflower, their intent, the Pilgrims, or the first Thanksgiving that was genocidal, was evil, was domination, nothing. It was true synergy between them, mutual respect, mutual benefit, Squanto, an American hero, God using his turmoil to bless this nation. Truly providential and
there
divine.
was absolutely right.
You know?
The genocide thing is just
a lie.
It's unjust. It is a disgusting lie that diminishes the sacrifices
nobody-
of real people who gave up everything to start the ideals and to really sort of enshrine the ideals of this country and die for them. By the way, this was impressive for the Native Americans to look at a people that were, first of all, they weren't hostile, but they were willing to die. By the way, they had opportunities to go back to England. That captain ultimately went back in the spring.
Yeah, he did.
And he actually said, you guys better hurry up and get settled, and because I don't really have enough provisions to give you guys. That's why so many of them died. He had to keep enough provisions for his trip back. Yeah. Okay, so here they could have gone back. By the way, the Indians knew that, and these people chose to stay. That's impressive. So I just want you guys to recognize we care about this because it does damage. This is a lie, and this is what's being taught in elementary schools, in high schools. By the time you graduate at age 21 from the average high school, you loathe the United States of America because you get a bullshit version of it. But you get an unjust
you better not graduate
version
at 21.
that maligns people who gave up everything so that you guys can have what you have right now. That's right. That's right.
And Bradford was the
you and me.
Wasn't it? Isn't it Bradford's diary in his
William
writings?
Bradford. We have two sources.
But he writes about Squantos because Squanto ultimately gets sick.
We have two sources. One of them was written in around 1621 by one of the colonists, Edward Winslow. But the one that's most robust
is Bradford.
That's right. And William Bradford was the second governor of Plymouth, and he wrote on Plymouth Plantation. Yeah. The problem is we didn't have access to his manuscript until about 1857. England found a way to grab it. They kept it from us. That's right. Around 1777, one of the last loyal, it would be a royal governor in 1777, took that manuscript with him back to England. They held on to it for a long time, and they decided they were going to publish a version of it right around the 1850s. I think it was 1857. And that's part of what inspired Lincoln, because the nation was reacquainted with the Pilgrim story in the late 1850s. We hadn't had it. We lost it for 70 years because England hung on to it. By the way, they do. I know where I read this, but England really knows how to keep a grudge. No kidding. Yeah. So they kept it from us for about 70 or 80 years. We had a rendition of it in 1857. Nico, it re-inspired the nation in a time of great hostility and civil war. And that's really what sort of reacquainted the nation with the story of the Pilgrims. And it prompted Lincoln to issue that declaration that Thanksgiving was going to be held on the last Thursday of November.
Do you have a copy of it?
I think it was a copy of what?
Of Lincoln's declaration of Thanksgiving.
Declared,
Jaden,
you
where's
can pull
the
it
copy?
up,
Come on.
October 3rd, 1863. It's beautiful.
It's really,
look it up.
The wordsmith that Lincoln was
and he
amazing.
went way out of his way.
But let me tell you this. But
to
what I
shower
thought about
praise
Bradford,
on the Pilgrims. Go
what I
ahead.
thought about Bradford's, one of his manuscripts talks about Squanto's deathbed. Because he ultimately gets sick. He passes on eventually, obviously. I don't know how old he was. I don't remember. But he says, pray for me that I may make it into your heaven with your God, because the Christian ideology had influenced him. First of all, those monks that bought him and bring him and help him pave the way to get him back to Plymouth, where God used that in a huge way. Can you imagine where our country would be if it wasn't for Squanto? If he had died and he was never taken into slavery?
Man, you're really pumped about Squanto.
But the guys that bad at. I mean, no, but think.
I mean,
you
he's on
tell
it.
me how
I
we're
can't
at
disagree.
without him. I mean,
Can't
how do we say? I mean, you talk about honoring someone. We should honor that sumbitch. I mean, he just
His full name was Tisquantum, by the way. But
Yeah.
we'll call him Squanto for now. I like that.
Well, that's the.
But no, he deserves.
But
honor.
I mean,
he deserves to be honored.
He's asking for prayers because he wants to be with
it.
our God and our heaven. He was so influenced by it. He had gone through tremendous hardship, but the Lord used him in a very divine, inspired way. And look, we're here for it. And then we've gotten so far away from our foundation. The Mayflower Compact should be taught and studied. It's not. The narrative of this genocidal bullshit that the Pilgrims were some, Army Rangers coming in to take over the poor Native Americans, which is bullshit. They had enough issues with other tribes. I mean,
And they were
really going
fighting
at
each other. Weren't Native Americans fighting each other constantly?
It was constant. I want to, Nico. If
constant.
it's okay, I want to drop again two sources because I think you guys need to recognize this isn't history according to LaHood and Araujo here. That's not what we're doing. There's a lot of research on this, but perhaps the two leading sources I mentioned, one of them And yes, it's the CDC. Emerging Infectious Diseases, February 2010, volume 16, number 2, okay? And it actually addresses the causative factors to plague, to death in New England, 1616 to 1619, preceding 1620. It's not higher math, you can tell. The other one is by Dr. Jared Diamond. He wrote a book I think everybody should read called Guns, Germs, and Steel. And he makes the assertion, which I think is breathtaking, that pre-Columbian Native American populations were wiped out to the tune of 98%. That's right. Pre-Columbian means the Columbian era, Christopher Columbus era, if you will, up until the 16 and 1700s. By the time we reach the 1700s, 98% of their populations had been wiped out, and it was by plague.
Yeah.
It wasn't by genocide. Yeah. Okay? And to my knowledge, that's not exactly a Christian source. All right? Look
What's
it
his
up.
name? Something Diamond? What's his
Dr.
first-
Jared Diamond.
Like Jared from Subway?
Guns, Germs, and Steel.
That guy in prison now?
Oh, is he?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Probably
Jared,
not.
right? Jared?
Thinking not
For
the
like
same
child
guy.
pornography or something? That guy's a weirdo. All right. Well, look, sorry we digress. Well, look, at the
Look,
bottom, the whole purpose
ignorance
is
combined
dangerous.
with a political agenda is unbelievably destructive.
Oh, God.
And
It's not bliss. Ignorance is not bliss.
And we're looking at our innocent young boys and girls, and by the time they get to college, you've got a full court press.
Look, I mean, you
and
got this prick in the soccer whatever World Cup, the American coach wearing a stupid ass Nike shirt that just says States or whatever the shit he said. Not United States, no flag. It's a black T-shirt. Of course, it's got to be a black
It's
and white
reprehensible
T-shirt.
bullshit, man.
It's absolute bullshit.
That guy should be thrown out on his ass.
But nobody has the balls to say anything to him.
Right.
This guy's that is absolute bullshit.
not see that.
I mean,
It's wrong.
Every
It's-
other country's proud of their flag. They chant and they. It's completely based off of a lie.
You see them singing.
It's
You see other
promulgated.
countries
chanting.
singing the national anthem in countries that are a disaster, economically, socially, culturally. At least in terms of the things we hold dear: religious liberty, civil liberties, freedom of the press, free speech. In terms of those standards, they're sitting there weeping with pride over their country. Okay, and we've got a hack for a soccer coach. He can't even put the word united.
But no, it's not him. Nike. Screw Nike. I would
Nike
just go
made it,
bankrupt.
yeah.
What's he doing with that shirt
I don't
on
even
him?
wear- I don't
Why
even
would he
wear Nike
consent to
shit.
wearing
I
a
wouldn't-
shirt like that?
He knew what he's doing, though. Yeah.
Of course he does
Yeah.
know what he's doing.
But
of course he knows what he's doing.
But England just also took a knee for BLM, which I thought was ironic because, yeah.
Well, that's a different
BLM.
show.
That's a
different
whole other show.
that's a thing.
Okay, but how does that happen, guys? It happens because there's zero time spent having these conversations. This is what American high school teachers should be doing.
Yeah.
They should be walking through what colonization actually meant in the United States. What colonies
Just teach-
actually
Here's
were,
the
what
deal.
they did
Teach
there.
the history the way it is. All the ugliness, the beauty,
Right.
the terribleness, the redemptive aspect of it. Just teach history.
Teach it all.
Don't change it. Just teach it, whatever it is, so we can learn from it and not do the stuff that we don't like, and repeat and make sure we don't lose the stuff that benefited us, our foundation, our core. We've gotten so far away from that, and the history of the first Thanksgiving or the first recognized Thanksgiving, and the history of the Pilgrims and Plymouth is critical. Absolutely critical.
And yes,
Look,
in
this was a
case you haven't
Copenhagen
noticed,
version.
we didn't emphasize it too much, but it should be the elephant in the middle of the room, right? Yes, it was their Christian convictions
Yes.
that animated the Pilgrims to do what they did. They were Puritans
for property.
for a reason.
Yeah, pay
they
for
wanted
property.
sound doctrine. They didn't want the church to weave in political notions into the doctrine, right? They wanted to be able to meet and talk freely about the gospel, to share their faith. They wanted to have house churches, which is really sort of the model of the early church. If you read in Acts chapter 2 and 3 and 4 ensuing, you're going to see that's what these were. They were house churches. Believers met together and they talked about doctrine. Acts 2:42, for instance, affirms that Christians gathered together under the apostles with the apostles to learn Christian doctrine. And so the Puritans wanted to go back to that early church model. That's why.
funny.
And so that's important. So why is this on R-rated Christianity? Well, we care about truth. We don't like historical revision. We don't. We think it's deeply damaging to the psyche of a country. I think the American mind has been fractured. I really believe that. We believe that. The American mind has been fractured by a pile of bullshit, of people that are completely detached from where they come from, Nico. And I use the analogy of a person who's been in a horrific car accident. They're in ICU, they've lost their memory, and they're at the mercy of everybody around them. They can be made to do whatever they want to do. And that's exactly how I see the average high school graduate today, and certainly the average college graduate. The amount of indoctrination these individuals are going through. And you guys are subsidizing that. If you've got a kid right now, certainly in a high school, in a public high school, if you have a child who's going to a university, specifically a public university, you really need to see where your dollars are going. You're going to lose your child mentally. You are. They're going to hate themselves. If you're a Christian, they're going to hate the things that you hold dear. This is deeply dangerous. This is how a nation comes apart. If you don't think this nation is divided, you might ask yourself, where did it start? Because this doesn't happen overnight. That coach didn't end up with a States shirt overnight.
Well, look, I mean, just two last points, and then I know we've covered our time.
I also want to say one thing after you.
Well, then you say it first, because then I'm gonna.
What's your guys' thoughts on this kind of, obviously there's revisionist history, kind of erasing the past, kind of rewrite it. But even now in today's culture, we have this kind of weird thing where we have to remove all the sports teams that have maybe like an Indian name, like the Braves or the Indians or the Redskins. And it's interesting because they'll project and accuse the conservative side, oh, you just want to whitewash everything and this, that, and the other. It's actually there. But what you ask Native Americans about these things, they actually don't want the names to be changed. They want the names because it kind of shows that they exist and that they have a history, and it's just being removed completely.
You answer that.
Well, I don't know what the question is. I mean, it's bullshit. I mean, we shouldn't do it. I mean, you know, you got Aunt Jemima, the pancake mix is gone. I mean, Cheap Cherokee is gone. I mean, Uncle Ben's rice is gone. I mean, we've got decades of this stuff, and now all of a sudden people and the people complaining about it
and the Redskins
are the I said that now they're the whatever, the Commanders or the bullshit they are.
It's not the Washington Redskins anymore.
No, they changed that and the Indians in Cleveland.
All I'm saying is the people that they're supposed to be protecting are not complaining about it.
Yep.
Nobody's complaining about this stuff except a group of idiots that are trying to enforce and impose their demented ideology on everybody else.
Yes.
And so that's the quick answer to that. But
Yep.
that only happens when you have a lack of education and a lack of courage. And it's hard to be courageous if you don't know what you're defending. So ignorance is not bliss is dangerous, right? And then Hosea 4:6 says, my people perish for what? Lack of knowledge. And so we have to educate ourselves and seek wisdom, James 1:5. And so you said something about the Puritans, about the Pilgrims. You know, they didn't believe the church was the body to them. They called their church a meeting place or a meeting house. It wasn't the church. They didn't have stained glass on it. It was just a place to meet. It was their courtroom. The church was the body. It was them, the people, and they met. They called it the meeting place or the meeting house. They were very distinct about that the church was the body of Christ, number one. Lastly, I think to George's point about educating our children, I like several quotes from Albert Einstein, but here's one that's truly, we believe in critical thinking. I mean, sparring with ideas in your mind. Logically, is what you're saying or advocating logically consistent? Does it not violate the law of non-contradiction of something being A and non-A at the same time? Albert Einstein said this: education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. I love that. That's truly what it is. Are we training our young people's mind to think independently of themselves, free thought, free expression, to debate with ideas? University, what does it really mean? It means unity and diversity. University, unity and diversity. We don't have that anymore. We have to have groupthink. You got to go in there and march and be a robot and say the same thing and think the same thing, or if you think it, don't say it, and act it, fake it till you make it type bullshit. University has completely been bastardized. We want diversity, unity and diversity, so we can have this idea of the old Greek town, center where you used to debate and have this exchange of ideas, and let the in the court of public opinion, let the good ideas prevail because they're logically consistent.
Encourage curiosity.
Absolutely.
Encourage it.
So look, guys, sorry for the mental dump and the history dump and a little bit. That's my fault, not George's. I mean, if it was up to George, he'd still be talking on the first part for another 3 hours, and I'm trying to get you as much information just to kind of pierce that bubble of bullshit that you're hearing these days. There's so much more to go into this. I hope it was just kind of vomit of information that hopefully helped a lot. And
If there's anything that people are wondering about that we just don't have time to cover,
Well,
write in, text in.
Yeah,
if
we
there's
got
anything that's
a lot of people asking, especially on YouTube, about they would love for you two to do the real history of the Alamo.
from a Christian standpoint, I don't know if there's a Christian aspect. I mean, we're not historians. I mean, yeah, we can talk about it, but we like to focus on a biblical lens.
this is, I'm not sure if this is a compliment or not. Was this so intriguing that you guys want us to do the same thing for the Alamo, or did we just lose you did we just lose you at hello? And now you want to just like, hey guys,
change
just,
subject. We don't want this. No, I'm kidding.
So which is it?
We'll think about it.
All right, we'll think about it.
Write some more stuff in.
We'll think about it. By that, we won't think about it.
I mean, look, we want to have real, raw conversations that lead us to a redemptive relationship with Jesus Christ. We believe, as followers of Christ, as advocates of the Christian ideology, as Matthew 28:19 missionaries out there, to go into all nations, making disciples, students of all men, teaching them to obey all that I've commanded, baptized in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. We have to infiltrate every aspect of our society, of our world, put on the lens of the Bible, put on heaven's perspective, Jesus' advocacy. He's our Lord, so we love what he loves, we hate what he hates, and we hold sacred what he holds sacred. That means we got to be able to look at everything from a biblical lens. So that's our motivation.
Amen. As a parting word, sidebar.
Sidebar Saturday mornings.
Yes, that's right. Join us tomorrow on Sidebar.
Tomorrow Saturday.
9 to 10. Can you believe that? Man, time flies. On 1200 WOAI from 9 to 10, Sidebar.
I've been listening to last week's on the way over here. I'm waiting for the part where you two go at it because I know that Solo made a cool clip of it about Trump.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't see it.
Hey, every time I learn a lot from this guy.
You're kidding me.
No, I'm serious. I mean, I love those rants.
Well,
You kidding me? We go at it. We do. We go at it.
Well, it's
That's the way to learn.
Iron sharpens iron, right, guys? That's what we got to do.
Encourage curiosity.
Paul and Peter went at it, and they edified each other when it was all said and done because they both wanted to submit themselves to the Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, and they knew that the last parting, mission statement was to go into everywhere. And
Well, how do you know if you have a
disciple
real
students.
friendship if there's never been any disagreement on anything?
That's right.
I'm out.
I just say wrong,
kinda boring.
wrong. No.
All right, guys. Hope this benefited you somewhat. Share it with someone you think would benefit. There's a lot of sources out there. If you write in, George will give you all the sources. He's the genius on the staff here.
Hardly, but write
hopefully
in,
it benefits
please.
you. Share it with somebody. God bless you guys. Tune in tomorrow, Sidebar, if you want to hear some more rants and talking and just critical thinking. And then we'll see you, God willing, next Thursday. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving and
Yes,
give
happy
thanks to
Thanksgiving.
God, and then you think about and talk to Him about what you're thankful for. God bless you.